Thanks everybody from Halt to Harm for joining this unique kickoff to a weekend of activity. Really, this is really the kickoff. We are very excited to be able to welcome Rob Bilott to Halt to Harm Network event. This movie has been on most advocates' must-watch list since the beginning of the pandemic, and we started when it came out. Those of us that caught it were really excited about it. And it's just a huge opportunity for us to be able to present this tonight, this weekend. And then, the graciousness of Rob to be able to jump on and answer a few questions and kind of build excitement around his work. I don't think any of you who watched the film over the weekend are not going to just be totally moved by the beautiful story that it tells, and the way that so much of it resonates with the work that we do in the Halt to Harm. We won't give away too many spoilers, but there's one, and you'll have to figure it out afterwards from the show. But with that, I'd really like to start just by introducing Rob. So Rob Bilott is the attorney that the movie is based on. He wrote a book, and I think Ryan, you can put the book in the chat so people can get their hands on that. Rob was the plaintiff that won, that represented 70,000 people in a class action suit against DuPont, one of the largest companies in the world, and he won. So, Rob is a graduate of Ohio State, that's where he got his law degree. And the thing that really resonated was, like most of us, he was pushed into advocacy by someone in his family. His grandmother made him do something, and kind of got this all going. So, Rob, I know I glossed over. Oh, also, totally interesting. Rob is a Right Livelihood laureate or award winner, the kind of Nobel Prize for people that are creating social change. Really kind of fantastic award. I'd love to hear some of that story as well. But Rob, I glossed over a lot. If you could just kind of maybe introduce yourself and pull out some highlights on and how you connect with the folks of Halt to Harm Network.
Sure. First of all, thanks so much for inviting me to be here tonight, and thank you to everybody that's able to participate. It's really an honor to be able to be here and talk about this issue with everyone, and really to be meeting with folks who are interested in doing what they can to help protect the environment too. I've been an attorney now for 30 years, and the last 22 years of that have been focused on PFAS chemicals. Again, not something I necessarily was realizing I was getting into at the time. I won't give away too much for those of you who haven't seen the movie yet, but this really kind of came to me through, as Marty was mentioning, my grandmother, through folks that grew up in the same town my mom's family was from, out in Parkersburg, West Virginia. Folks that came to us needing some help in trying to figure out why their cows were dying on their property, hundreds of animals, and why they themselves were getting sick. And that led us into an investigation and legal odyssey that continues to this day. And I was really incredibly fortunate to be able to work with folks at Participant Media, and Mark Ruffalo in particular, who were just incredibly passionate about finding a way to bring this story out to the broader public, into a bigger audience, particularly to show what can be done by dedicated individuals in communities who think there is an environmental issue. And no matter how insurmountable the odds may seem, how big the adversary may seem, that things can be changed, things can be done with the dedication and perseverance of just even one person standing up, speaking out, and demanding that things be different, and the power of a community coming behind and supporting individuals in those kinds of efforts. And it may take a long time. In the case of PFAS chemicals, these chemicals that we ended up discovering were not just in the water these cows were drinking in West Virginia, but in drinking water, frankly, all over the country, all over the world, in the blood of virtually every living creature on the planet. Pretty unprecedented, massive worldwide chemical contamination. But it took a long time to uncover that, to bring that story out. But by the dedication and perseverance of individuals and community members, making sure that this health threat information got out, things are changing. Legislation is being proposed. States are adopting new rules and regulations. The media is starting to talk about these issues. And this is something that is finally making its way out. And we're actually seeing the laws begin to change because of what these folks were able to do. So I'm really proud to be able to talk with folks that are similarly motivated to try to make sure that they address whatever the environmental issues may be in their community or that they're confronting, particularly to make sure that we help increase everyone's understanding and awareness of this PFAS chemical contamination, where it's coming from. This stuff has been used in so many different products, invented right after World War II, completely man-made chemicals. They don't exist on the planet other than a couple of companies that produced them over the years and knowingly put them out into the world, into the environment, knowing that they were going to get out and stay in the environment and not break down. You hear them referred to as forever chemicals now because they don't break down under natural conditions, and that they would get into humans, into our blood, into the blood of babies that are being born to this day. So it's incredibly important that we help spread the awareness and help make sure that this story is told and that people continue to talk about it. So again, thank you for inviting me to be here tonight and to discuss these issues and to help spread awareness. So thank you.
Great. We don't want to give away the whole, any of the film. So, I really hope people have that. We're going to have a follow-up discussion with some scientists and policy people to talk about this on Monday, and anybody who watches the film will be able to join us there. So I would want to talk, just about some of the themes, especially the common themes between the work that some of the people who work on fracking and oil and gas development issues and your work. So, I think a few things, just how important is kind of transparency and chemical transparency. You were kind of a pioneer in this space. Can you talk about that and talk about, the role that it played and how important it is today?
Critically important. That's one of the things I try to explore a little more detail in my book as well. Exposure is just, how do we get into situations like this? How is it possible that, in the United States, in present time, we could have something like this occurring on such a big scale and being essentially unregulated and not much information out there and not much available. How does this happen, and how is it that the regulators don't even know that this is happening in most of these situations? And again, it's all intertwined with the way in which our laws are developed, just the chronology of the way things have unfolded historically. A lot of chemicals and a lot of these things came out in the early 20th century, decades before we even had a U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. The U.S. EPA didn't come into existence till 1970. Some of the first federal laws really regulating what kind of information and testing had to be done on new chemicals coming out into the environment really didn't come out until the late 1970s. So what about these tens of thousands of chemicals that had been manufactured before those laws came into place? Our laws for many years, and I'm kind of oversimplifying here, these are pretty complicated statutes, but in essence, our laws essentially said for those those chemicals that were already out there, it was up to the companies that were making and using those to alert the regulators, to alert the US EPA if there was information suggesting a substantial risk to human health or the environment. And unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily always happen, despite what may be decades of internal studies showing serious threat and risk to human health. If that information is withheld, if it's covered up, if it's actively concealed and only comes out through litigation and lawsuits, in the meantime, what's happening? All of us are continuing to be exposed to those things. And unfortunately, we become the human guinea pigs that are exposed to these chemicals, and even without our knowledge, not even realizing we're being exposed. Then we're told, when we finally find out that this exposure exists, that it's been happening for decades, and we want to stop it, what we're told by our current legal system and a lot of the way in which our laws and courts work is that we, the exposed people, have the burden to prove that this chemical is causing us harm. Yet, how do we do that when we don't have the information, when the information is withheld, or it's covered up, or it's claimed to be confidential business information? And it's incredibly difficult. And I think you'll see some of that. And not to get too much of a spoiler alert again, but I mean, just how difficult that can be and what is involved in trying to cut through that. So having information readily available about not only what chemicals are there, but what products are they used in. A lot of folks that are even companies that are making products don't even necessarily realize these things are in their raw materials, because the manufacturers of the raw chemicals aren't telling them, aren't giving them that information. So again, information, it's critical that we have transparency about where these chemicals are, where they're used, what products, and most importantly, what their potential effects are.
What about the people that are going to see this and say, well, that was in the past, like, how do you feel like the current regime of self-reporting and self-diagnosis that companies do, or regulator capture, some of these bigger issues play out today, even with the industries that are active, and producing chemicals today?
I wish we could say this was the past. In fact, the situation, for example, with PFAS chemicals was actually pointed to as used as an example of why we needed to try to change a lot of those laws. And some of that happened back in 2016. There were amendments to some of the federal laws to try to beef up this system. But a lot of this system, it's still in place. And unfortunately, let's take the PFAS chemicals as an example. It took maybe decades to find out about what was known about just one of these chemicals. Yet then, when we finally find out what has been known for a long time about that one chemical, and we start to realize, wait a minute, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of very similar related chemicals in that same chemical family. What do we know about those? That we suddenly find out we're still in this same system of needing to rely upon the companies to tell us what's known about these other ones. What's the toxicity? And we're being told, well, the same system applies. We have the burden to show whether those chemicals are harmful or not, even though we don't have access to the studies, to the test data, the tens of millions, if not more, in dollars that it costs to do some of the studies to show what those health effects are. So unfortunately, that system is still there. And there are a lot of folks now in the scientific community, in the regulatory world, and in the legislative bodies, in the states, in the federal level, internationally, that are saying we need to approach this in a very different way. Maybe we need to start addressing things even as a class, instead of saying we need to regulate one chemical at a time, because otherwise it becomes sort of this whack-a-mole game where you focus and you spend 20 years focusing on one chemical, and as soon as you find out what was known about it, that it's harmful, you tweak it a bit, you call it something new, and you start all over again. And so I think, again, the PFAS chemical situation has really been used as a prime example of how this system isn't working and needs to be changed.
Thanks. What, you have fought a huge company for so many years. What have you learned? So many of the advocates that we support and the leaders who are paying attention to this, they're fighting enormous companies. Well, what have you learned about the industry playbook and how it attacks the scientists and the other voices in the community?
Unfortunately, in the PFAS situation, what we saw was there was an incredible amount of information known by the company's own scientists that had been doing incredible work for decades, toxicology studies on different rats and different laboratory test animals and humans, monitoring the workers. Incredible wealth of information. Yet when that information finally started to get revealed to the public, because it was forced out through lawsuits or litigation, then we saw, unfortunately, a fairly similar playbook that we had seen in other situations, say tobacco and other cases, where it's the manufacture of doubt, that scientists are hired to come out and go into courtrooms, to go talk to the media, to speak publicly and say that either that science just doesn't even exist, or to contradict it and say, we don't know enough, there needs to be more studies, it's premature to be taking action to try to regulate or restrict any of these materials, more study needs to be done, delay. And we step back and take a look at this. That's what, in the PFAS case, for example, that's been happening for the last 20, 30 years, and it's continuing to this day. We still have folks that are being paid to go into the US Congress even and say, there's not enough known here about the risks from these materials. We need to slow down and versus let's take a precautionary approach. Let's protect people. We know enough now to know things need to be done to stop these exposures and make sure it doesn't continue. So it's rather amazing when you step back and look at it to think this is still happening in this country. And again, that's why it's so important to have these public discussions, to be able to show these stories like you're going to see in the film Dark Waters, that to let people understand this actually does happen, and how important it is for people to speak up and say, no, let's look at the actual facts, the actual science, and actually take action to protect people before they're made sick, before the harm is done.
When you talk about, the people who are made sick, and obviously the victims that you were dealing with were some of them very advanced in the health problems. What did you learn? I think many of our organizers are either pushed into this from their families, or certainly bump into people in the community. We've had different webinars with the body burden that people live under when they live in fracking zones. What have you learned about kind of supporting and working with victims and people who are sick and agitated by the system and the way it lets them down?
Yeah, I try to, again, this is something I try to explore a little more in the book, is to just show, how these kinds of situations impact real people, real families, employees at even, the PFAS companies, for example, that the pace at which some of this moves is so slow and so complex. Unfortunately, our lives aren't put on hold while we work out these legal issues and debate the science for decades. People get sick. People die, and we need to be cognizant of the fact that there are real people that are impacted by this on a daily basis, and so I think it's critically important to highlight and to show those real impacts about how real people are dealing with these issues. This is not an abstract legal problem or some abstract scientific debate. There with PFAS, for example, people are drinking it all across the world. It's in our blood. our babies are born with, or polar bears are walking around with this stuff in their blood. I mean, this is happening now. These are chemicals in PFAS case, for example, that have been linked with decreasing or impairing our immune systems and decreasing the effectiveness of vaccines. Why is that not getting more attention? Yes, if you go to the CDC's website, they've even got a posting there saying we're looking into this connection. Yet think about it. There are chemicals that are in everyone's blood. They're in our drinking water, and they could be impairing our immune function and decreasing effectiveness of vaccines while we're all dealing with a pandemic. And it's stories like that that really need to be highlighted and shown how there are real people. This is an ongoing daily issue, and it demands that action be taken. It's ironic that I say this after the situation I've been dealing with. We've been trying to do this now for over 22 years, but it's starting to happen. The discussions are occurring, that people are finally, proposing laws and regulations and action to finally try to stop this. So you've got to keep at it, got to keep being persistent on it, and keep showing those stories and elevating public's awareness that there are real people involved.
How did you, more into that, the stress, the anger that was directed for you? I think a lot of activists work in communities, especially in fracking, where the fracking is also the big employer, or the perception of wealth in their community. How'd you deal with the anger and just sustain the fight for so long? I mean,
and in the PFAS situation, we were in the case we were dealing with, in particular with DuPont. I mean, this was a major employer in town. A lot of folks worked either at the plant or had relatives that did, or knew neighbors that did, and frankly wanted to believe that this was not happening. And even when we did our massive human health studies, we're hoping that people that came forward and participated, a lot of them were hoping it would help show that there wasn't a problem. So, it's incredibly difficult when you're dealing with a problem created by one of the main employers in town. And I think, again, I try not to give too much away from the film, but I mean, you're going to see how those dynamics, affect real people, and what kind of courage it takes for people to stand up, nevertheless, in those communities, and take on, that kind of pressure, because it's an incredible pressure that can come to bear in a situation like that. But again, getting the story out, getting the information to the public, to the media, to regulators, to scientists, I think helps alleviate the pressure on those individuals. Once that story makes its way out and people realize you can't cover this up, you can't just, make this person be quiet and the story goes away. If you start getting it out to as many different outlets as you can, I think that helps those people in those communities.
Nice. Well, I still have a bunch of questions, but Ryan, are we getting any questions from folks that I should pull up? We did want to open up some Q&A, and then I got one or two more that I want to throw on there. Thanks.
Yeah, well, one of the questions that came in was just about any recommended resources for, finding more information. So networks of organizations, places to search for, let's say by zip code, what are the contaminations that you might be exposed to?
I can offer information on PFAS. I honestly am not as familiar with the fracking situation, but in the PFAS case, there are a number of groups that are out there right now trying to make information available, trying to join together, so that when people find out, for example, hey, this stuff just got detected in our drinking water, that they're not struggling on their own, trying to figure out, what does this mean? What do these chemicals do? What's a safe level? That there are resources available. Some of the different groups that have pulled together this kind of information are the Environmental Working Group in DC, for example. They have a great map that shows you where the sampling has occurred, for example. Green Science Policy Institute, Center for Environmental Health. There are a number of different organizations. In fact, when the movie rolled out, Dark Waters, there was kind of a coalition of groups that formed something called the Fight Forever Chemicals campaign. And in fact, that even, I think, won an award from the UN. It's SDG. I always forget what the acronym stands for, but efforts to try to put groups together to help bring information out through social media campaigns. So, that I think it is an incredibly effective tool, helping people understand where to find this stuff. So, if you type in PFAS or NGO groups, you're going to find a lot of information available about them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And I'm already finding a few things, so I'll certainly compile whatever research I can put together with some links with the replay as well.
Yeah, and if people do any research and they can bring it to that webinar on Monday, we'll make sure that we develop links and kind of connect people into that after everybody watches the movie. So, yeah, that'll be good. Ryan, before we ask another one of the things that I think a lot of people deal with is regulatory capture. And you hear it in small towns. We deal with a lot of rural areas where there's things going on. I think it's a theme that you've run across. Can you talk a little bit about that from your experience, what it looks like, what it means and how it impacted your work?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, very, very familiar with that concept. You're going to see it in the film. I talk about it in a great degree in the book because, it's something you've got to be aware of and to understand how it works and why it's there. In the case of PFAS, for example, you had situations in states, for example, where the regulatory agencies were working very closely with the companies. This concept of regulatory capture is where the company or the industry that's supposed to be regulated ends up running the agency that's supposed to be regulating them. In the PFAS case, for example, you had a situation where that in DuPont, a lot of their own attorneys working for DuPont ended up going and running the state of West Virginia's EPA in charge of enforcing the same issues with PFAS, which was just rather mind-blowing. You had similar situation that developed in Minnesota, where the hometown of 3M, the company that invented a lot of these PFAS chemicals, where you had folks that became whistleblowers within the agency saying, hey, we're getting pressure to back off on PFAS issues. And, a former 3M environmental manager is running the agency, that kind of thing. So unfortunately, you see that a lot. And you can see that happen even at the federal level when you have agencies where you've got great people, dedicated people, but you've got limited resources. You've got so many different chemicals. You've got companies that are able to come in and spend a lot of money with very sophisticated experts and consultants that come in and present papers and present ways to approach things. That is very tempting for the agencies who are overworked, understaffed, under-budgeted. So it's a serious issue, and one I think people just have to be mindful of. That there is that potential. It happens, and to some degree, it's continuing to happen in a lot of places.
Sure. Ryan, anything else from the chat? Oh, you're on mute, Ryan.
Sorry about that. There was a question about fire departments and anything done with and I'm not sure if the question was about regulating fire departments or about informing fire departments about risks, because they might be dealing with this. So,
yeah, as the information finally started to roll out about some of these PFAS chemicals, again, I apologize for a spoiler here, but some of the materials were handled by DuPont. Well, some of them ended up being used in a lot of different types of commercial products. One commercial product that has used these types of chemicals for many, many years was a certain type of firefighting foam called AFFF, aqueous film forming foam. It's the type of firefighting foam used for typically petroleum-based fires. Historically has had PFAS in it. And what has happened is, as information about these chemicals, particularly the two that we know the most about that have, you hear them called C8s, they have 8 carbons, PFOA and PFOS are the two most well-known, both of which historically had been in these types of firefighting foams. Well, when the US EPA came out for the first time with a drinking water guideline in 2016 for these chemicals, the Department of Defense, who realized that these chemicals had been used in firefighting foams, went out and started sampling around military bases and airports all over the country. And unfortunately started finding these chemicals in the drinking water outside of these places. And that led to a lot of folks realizing these foams had obviously been used in firehouses all over the country. Now, unfortunately, the people that have been using them, the firefighters who have been told they could use these, use them by spraying them out into the environment, bathing almost in these chemicals, unfortunately weren't told, that these things had these harmful chemicals in them or to avoid them. Now, unfortunately, we're also realizing not only was it in the foam, but it potentially was used in the coatings on their gear in the past. Things, to help make them waterproof or stain resistant. And that has potentially come off and has been now being found in the dust of firehouses all over the country. So these folks, that we have been relying upon to protect us, unfortunately, they weren't being protected by the chemical companies that were making this stuff and not telling them, that this stuff was in the foam or potentially in the gear that they were using. That kind of information is just now starting to trickle out to the firefighting community. And again, it's incredibly important that we help spread that information. And there are a lot of folks right now doing a lot of good work in doing that, setting up webinars, setting up different venues where firefighters can get access to this kind of information. And what you're seeing now across the country and frankly across the world are places that are now banning those types of firefighting foams or setting rules and restrictions on how they can be used or requiring at a minimum that disclosures and warnings be made to those who are using those to understand what their exposure might be. So again, all of that as a result of people finally becoming aware. And we just need to help do what we can to keep spreading that awareness.
As you get, you're the billion-dollar attorney, you're the guy with the big win. You must get approached all the time with the kind of trending cases that maybe there's not a case yet, or, when you hear the trends of things coming in, what are you most concerned about? What kind of trends in the things that you're hearing about make you nervous about the pollution that we're getting exposed to?
Well, frankly, I have continued to be focusing on the PFAS problem. I mean, this has gone beyond the one farmer in West Virginia or the one community or even one country. This is an international problem now. We've got litigation now all over the United States, and now there's litigation worldwide over these chemicals. People are realizing that they present a health threat, and it's one of the concerning things is just because of the nature of the chemical. They have this unique chemical structure that when they get in the environment, they don't break down. But when they get into us, they also have our bodies don't know how to get rid of them. Again, they're not naturally occurring. They tend to stay in us and build up over time. And so what regulators and scientists are struggling with is how do you determine what is a safe level in water when the tiniest amount that you're exposed to, if you continue to be exposed to it over time, is going to build up and up in your blood. So what we've been seeing is the regulatory guidelines, and even in some states that are adopting laws and standards now, the levels that are acceptable are going lower and lower and lower. And so that's generating a lot of litigation, because if you think about it, who's having to pay the costs right now? It's the water providers. States, municipalities are being told they have to spend millions of dollars now to clean this out of the water. States, are finding out that the fish, the soil, the wildlife is massively contaminated. States are bringing lawsuits. Communities are bringing lawsuits. Firefighters, are bringing claims. And all because the people who created this stuff and the people who put it out there, aren't accepting responsibility and are fighting these. In fact, even in some states that have started to adopt laws to try to limit this in drinking water, they're being sued by the manufacturers to stop them from enforcing those laws. So it's unfortunately a huge amount of litigation that's going on, and we're keeping, fortunately, pretty busy on the PFAS front.
I know the Halt to Harm leaders and people around the country are going to really eat up the movie. It was, I think if you do this work, many of us have seen the livestock photos and had the nightmare stories told to us again and again in community meetings. So it's a really powerful movie. You can't, make the difference so much between the PFAS and the fracking in my experience. It just really very much resonated with the kinds of stories that all of our leaders deal with on a daily basis. And your story is just so inspiring, and you're really to put yourself out there and make yourself vulnerable and fight for so long. It's been just fantastic to have you here. And I hope that all the leaders, we've gotten generous support to make the movie available to up to 500 people this weekend. And, if they tell your friends, you can pass the link along, and we can get people to watch this. And then on Monday, we can talk more about the science and the organizing and how it connects with our work. So I just really told everybody this was kind of a kickoff event for the weekend. And, if you have any final words on ways that people can learn more, I highly encourage them to watch the movie, get people to come and buy your book, and anything else that you want to say is we're so grateful that you're here. Really, thank you.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate what you're doing and what everybody online is doing, to help talk about issues like this. And, you mentioned, for example, some of the videotapes of the wildlife and all. Those of you, if you watch the film, when you see the videotape, that's the real videotape that was taken. And in fact, there's also a documentary that have some of the real folks in it from this story called The Devil We Know I think it might still be on Netflix. And again, you'll see when you see the video, it's the real video from these folks. So again, the folks that did the movie, I think were incredibly passionate about making sure it was accurate and that it showed what the real people were like, what really happened to these real folks, and including showing some of the real video, and you'll see some of the real people in the film as well.
Yeah, Rob makes an appearance. Yeah, really fantastic. Ryan, anything else from the chat that we want to pull up, and then just make sure that we wrap things up and everybody gets the links and understands what the follow-up is?
I think the big question that might be under the surface here, which did come up in the chat in a couple of different ways, is looking at this particular case as rare. It's rare to stand up to a big company like DuPont and have any victory that is able to start spreading and gaining hold where people are paying attention to it. So given how challenging it is and just how incredibly effective it is for companies to squash the concerns that are being brought, what are some other avenues, in your experience? Like the direction that you've taken, the litigation, what are other things that could be effective? Because it seems sometimes like trying to go at it through the litigation angle just requires so much incredible force that a lot of us just don't have in the grassroots.
Well, one of the things I think that's incredibly effective, of course, is if there could be legislation or regulations that eliminate the need to have to go into court. As a lawyer, I'll be the first one to tell you, people shouldn't have to go get lawyers, to get clean water or to be protected from exposure to dangerous chemicals like this. Unfortunately, that's what they had to do in order to get the clean water, to get relief from cancers and other injuries that were caused, because this regulatory legal process is still dragging on. I mean, in the United States, even the particular chemical that we were dealing with, we still don't have a federally enforceable standard, an actual drinking water limit nationwide for this chemical yet, because this process is so long. So the only way in which people were able to do it was going through the courts. But that's one of the reasons I wanted to do the book, Exposure, was to show what happened here, and show what could be done in a situation that seems unwinnable and insurmountable, that it can be done. And hopefully provide some guidance as to ways to try to shorten that up and hopefully not require 20 years, but also just to help people know that we're fortunate in the United States that we at least have that legal system as an option. I'm hearing from a lot of people internationally that don't have the ability to go into court, that don't have the ability to bring claims like this. They just can't do anything. So at least we have that option. But again, it would be great if we're able to short circuit that, by having laws that say very clearly, either this shouldn't happen or these are the people that are responsible for that and shall pay for it if it happens. But until that happens, at least we have the legal system, and hopefully with the book and this story helps show it can be done.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, everybody, for participating and jumping on. And thank you for the work that you guys do every single day in your communities, fighting all kinds of threats. And I really hope that we can get together on Monday and talk about the movie and all the spoilers and follow up and get more involved in your work and share resources. So thank you so much for your time. Really,
thank you.
Very appreciative.
Thanks. It was nice speaking with all of you.
All right. And folks, please spread the word, share the link, let folks know that they can watch the film with us this weekend. I'm going to be hosting a Saturday watch party, for those of you that want to hang out Saturday evening. And just be sharing the link. So I'll put it again here in the chat, and you shall get the streaming link first thing tomorrow morning, along with a passcode so that you can access, and feel free to share this as widely as you would like.
Thanks again.
All right. Take care, everyone. Bye, Rob. Bye, Marty.